welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back. I appreciate you showing up every week to listen to my musings and to my ponderings. Well, this week, I am going to be musing and pondering with a guest, Kathrine Aspås. Now, many of my Norwegian listeners probably know who Kathrine is, but for those who don't, she is a Norwegian freelance writer, a journalist, and a commentator. She's also a graduate economist and has worked for the Aftenposten business editorial for 13 years. Now, Aftenposten is sort of the national newspaper here in Norway. She currently works as an author, speaker, and presenter. Now, Kathrine has also written 3 best-selling books, The Age of Generosity, Pink is the New Punk, and The Emotion Revolution. Her work claims that brain research, recent economic research, and media development point towards moving towards a more open and more generous age. Now, the emotional revolution deals with how emotions affect who we are and the choices we make. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to invite Kathrine here, because we can't talk about building resilience or facing adversity without including the important component of emotions. At the end of the day, human beings are emotional creatures. We make emotional choices, and we tend to use logic and rationale to justify those emotional choices. Now, we have all experienced a range of emotions. We spoke many times what emotions are as this chemical cocktail of hormones and transmitters and neuromodulators, and these different combinations make us feel a different way. We've also talked many times of how emotions, or what we call embodied cognition, our body communicates to our brain in the form of these chemical compounds, what we call emotions. Because, as we've talked about also, is that the body does not have grammar. It does not have syntax to articulate things to our brains. And the only way it does is through these chemical messengers. But sometimes emotions can swamp us. They can hijack our thinking, our behavior, our attitude, everything. And part of facing adversity, part of building resilience, is understanding how to learn from our emotions, to learn to translate those emotions, that can bring us clarity and objectivity, where we can be more reflective of how we move into the game, how we deal with challenges and those adversities that show up on our doorstep, sometimes uninvited. So I welcome Kathrine to the conversation because she has a lot to bring to the game. So let's slip into the stream and meet Kathrine. So welcome back to It's an Inside Job. Today I have Kathrine Aspås with me, and she is, I guess, maybe a master of emotions to some extent. Well, welcome, Kathrine. I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Jason. I'm so honored. And talking about emotions, I'm holding my breath a little now. I'm a little excited and nervous, maybe. Tickles in my belly.
That's a good thing. It'll keep you frosty.
I know.
I was wondering, Kathrine, maybe we could start with you telling us a little about yourself and who you are and what you're about.
I'm an economist. I've been a financial journalist in Aftenposten, a Norwegian newspaper. And I have had this longing in me all since I started studying economics. Because economics back in the days, like this was in the 80s. And back in the days, economics was all about numbers. I think as the year went by, my longing for human connection with the numbers and just human connection in general grew so much in me. And I have to add here that
Please.
Because numbers and the mathematical part of economics was so strong, I thought it was something wrong with me, that I had all these feelings that didn't really fit into the
stereotype
math.
or the template.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the math. So I used a lot of energy to hide those feelings and to build like an armor of perfection and an armor of know-it-all and maybe even sarcasm. And I used my degrees, my master degree, as an armor to pretend that I was so strong and rational. And inside that armor, I grew more and more lonely and tired. And the longing for human connection in this was so strong. So that's really who I am, I think. It resonates when I haven't really told it this way before, but there's something about your open question that made me think of I'm holding
Hand over your
myself
heart.
now.
I see that.
Yes, because it has been such a long journey. And now I'm my profession is working with economics and feelings, because more and more our feelings are our competitive advantage. As the technology takes over so many of what we used to call jobs and work, being human, fully imperfectly, beautifully, longingly, powerfully human is our superpower. It's what we are going to do for the rest of eternity.
Yeah, I think emotions has always given us, those who could tap into emotions, to understand emotions, I've always had an advantage because it's part of that intuition. I mean, there's a whole science behind it, right? And sometimes people think, oh, emotions are all soft and they're gooey and they don't really add, they just cloud. Yes, they do sometimes cloud, but there is something called emotional valence. And emotional valence means there's a spectrum between emotions that we disengage and emotions all the way to we engage. But all emotions serve a purpose. Otherwise, evolutionary, they wouldn't be around. And it's to inform us of everything, because logic in itself, well, we are emotional creatures. And I've always understood that we make emotional choices, but we put up that facade, that armor, and say, no, it was logic. And we use logic to justify those emotional choices. So what you say truly resonates with me, because we met back in 2012 when we were both guests at TEDx Oslo. And that's when we first made contact. And I really wanted to touch base with you because I think you, Katrina, you can add so much to this mosaic of resilience, which is the major focus of this podcast. But I think that's really where I want to go, because what you speak to this, where we put up our armor and now you kind of taken off that armor, is you're using emotions to help you make better choices, to help others make better choices. And I think as we've migrated into a post-pandemic world, I think one thing of 2 years of lockdown has showed us is what you just said, that social human connection, how much that social emotional intelligence is a key. It's an ingredient that makes us better as teams or as organizations. Is this something along your line of thinking?
Jason, it's so interesting. When you talk, all these ideas comes up in my head, so I just have to sort. Right now, I would actually like to thank the pandemic. I mean, because it has made us aware of how much how much human contact means. It's been like an awakening, I think, in that. So I'm celebrating that
Yeah.
we've actually woke up to the longing for connection. And I want to say right there that connection is hard. And our brains, it's hard to be connected with other people. There's so many things to sort out, and we can be hurt, and there's no wonder it's hard for many of us to go back to work and even just go to the store sometimes, because our brain is not functioning like that. Our brain does not want us to be safe. It's not designed for us to be safe and happy and merry. It's designed to keep us safe. So we have like emotions. We have 70% uncomfortable emotions. Our 70% of our emotions are emotions like sorrow, shame. And that's because nature wanted us to be alert. So only 30% of our emotions are like happiness and excitement and buoyancy. And so it's no wonder, that's my point here, no wonder many of us struggle, because we don't know this. We think, I thought it was something wrong with me when I felt emotions like shame or fear or
guilt or overwhelm or stress or fear. Yes. Or yes.
But it's so normal. And my vision is to normalize and to get this out there, because that creates psychological safety, as I know you work a lot with, and I work with emotional safety also. So it's safe here to express emotions.
No, but I mean, all those emotions that you talk about, shame, guilt, fear, overwhelm, anger, stress, what have you, all of them serve a purpose. And I think I never knew about the 70-30 breakdown, but I can understand why there may be more emotions that are linked to avoidance or disengagement, because, we have a negativity bias kind of wired in our brains. And that negativity bias, well, it's not a bad thing. Well, if you think 100,000 years ago, it was to make us alert and pay attention, to be cognizant of dangers and hazards and threats, in order to, as you said, to keep us safe, to keep us alive so we can thrive and produce, children and such. And so the genes get carried on, right?
Yes, exactly. So it was the most afraid mammals that the most afraid and skeptic mammals that were able to reproduce, and now it's the most afraid and skeptical of us that has the biggest problem. So we really, the awakening to emotional and psychological safety, I salute it, and I celebrate everyone, and I really celebrate your work.
Thank you for that.
It helps us, thank you.
If you're looking to cultivate a life of endless creative possibilities, you're in the right place. Stop Time, Live in the Moment is where mindfulness meets creativity. Meet and learn about the human behind the headlines in my interview series with my extraordinary creative guests from Broadway to Hollywood and beyond. Interested in the art of living in the moment? Start your week off right with Serenity Sunday meditations, and on Thursdays tune in for short episodes packed with coaching tools and inspiration. I'm your host, Lisa Hopkins, and I cannot wait for you to join me on Stop Time, Live in the Moment to discover how to live your best life today.
Yeah, you've written a number of books, but your latest book is The Emotional Revolution. I was wondering if you could speak to that. Well, I'm more curious, first of all, why did you call it, or what is the reason you called it Emotional Revolution? I thought that was a very catchy title.
Thank you. I love that you say catchy, because a lot of people get afraid. It's like, oh no, I don't want more emotions, please. But the reason why the emotion revolution, it's because we are now living in the fourth industrial revolution. We're living at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution.
The digitalization, just to make sure we're on the same page. Yes.
The digitalization, the very powerful technologies that liberates us. And in the revolution, there's always liberation. But it's not comfortable. A revolution isn't really comfortable, but it's always liberation in it. And so there's a lot of liberation in the fourth industrial revolution. And we are, at the same time, we have a dawning of the first emotional revolution. We have discovered everything that's out there in our physical world, but the travel inside, the brain science, for instance, is so fresh and so new. So it's like I would compare brain science today with astrophysics. I know the New York Times has called the new century for the brain century, because we're going inside and see, okay, how do we tick? What happens in my brain when I get occupied by fear or occupied by joy or when I feel sorrow? So there's so much to discover here in the emotional arena. And I see how us being emotionally aware makes it easier for us to get in contact with other people. So what really get in the way is also often fear and shame. And when we can unpack those feelings, we can make that fourth industrial revolution a constructive one, not a destructive one, because we can use this technology for very bad things. So when we are awake and get in touch with our longing and our vulnerability and our compassion and build strength there, we can really thrive as a global society. That's my hope.
Yeah, I think because, understanding emotional valence, understanding, from the negative to the positive along the spectrum of emotions, those emotions we can touch base with that, because a lot of my clients, when they're trapped up in some sort of problem or challenge, whether it's leading themselves or leading others, sometimes we get so wrapped up on what's external to us that we lose sight of sort of the internal narrative that's driving our emotions, our thinking, and our behavior. And part of that is that self-awareness, is to sort of stop up and reflect and asking yourselves, what are emotions? Like guys, most of us, we know anger, sadness, and happiness. And that's the depth of our emotions, right? But it's trying to explore that, right? It's trying to articulate more about what am I feeling, right? Because what you're feeling is so indicative of maybe the approach I have to take to resolve a problem or a conundrum.
What you say it resonates, and it makes me so happy that you address it. And I get so hopeful that we can, guys and girls.
Guys and gals, yeah. We both
brothers
have to do it.
And sisters, that we together can unpack what we have learned and internalized, because I really hope that we can help young boys and girls and women, men, to really get in touch with themselves, with ourselves and each other. We're just in the beginning of this work. It's an uphill battle, because emotions has feelings. The word, at least here in Norway, has a really bad reputation. It's an uphill battle to really work with emotions and be taken seriously. We have to really be scientific. And I would like to be a little scientific with you now. Do you know a little emotion quiz? Are you up for it?
Yeah, go ahead, fire away. I'll see what I can do.
Do you know? I mean, we're just warming up here. Do you know what emotion gets in the way of innovation? We talk about innovation all the time. We want, because we need change. We need better technology. Do you know what?
Well, I guess the feeling of expertise can get in the way, because when we feel we know everything, then we think, oh, there's nothing new to learn. I know everything. And sometimes we get this when we age and we've reached a certain rank within a company. So I think that sense of expertise,
big time, the expertise. And now the emotion I'm after is really built into that feeling of expertise and superiority, because inside that superiority lies this deep sense of shame and fear of being irrelevant. So the feeling that gets in the way of innovation is that shame of being wrong, possibly being wrong, possibly when you're in a superior position, or when we meet in a hierarchy, we don't really meet each other. So the emotional revolution is also trying to meet in eyes, meet really heart to heart, across ranks. Because if we're going to talk, it's so it doesn't make sense for innovation to really have ranks, because ideas happens all over the place. And if some people don't talk because of shame of being wrong and belittled in a meeting, and the superior and the executive are right all the time because of fear of being wrong, then it's a really powerful situation that gets in the way of creating new stuff, new exciting.
Just that is, that sense of vulnerability. I mean, true psychological safety is when a team can open up, regardless of rank or responsibility, where you can have frank discussions. And part of what I see sometimes of this narrative, just to add on to what you said there, Katrina, is also this imposter syndrome. People feel if I step outside of my expertise, that it's going to show that I'm incompetent or I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that there is that fear of what you're saying to innovative products or innovative thinking, because if we can't have that vulnerability, then it can prevent growth. So I understand where you're coming from. It really connects with me. In the next part of our conversation, Katrina talks about her sojourn, her journey from quitting one of Norway's most known newspapers, where she was constantly in demand. But when she said bye-bye to the job, she also said bye-bye to that popularity. And there was that detox of constantly being in demand, because suddenly there was this vacuum, this quietness, this silence. And she had to really reflect. But this point became a pivotal point in her life, because in September 2009, she was asked to host a conference of 3 authors that spoke to emotions at the Oslo Opera House. But to speak about vulnerability, to speak about emotions, to host such a thing, she felt sort of inauthentic, because she wasn't even really checking in with herself. And as I said, that September evening was a pivotal point in Katrina's life, because at that point she stood up and something triggered in her, some tipping point where she shared her vulnerability with the audience, and she wasn't expecting the response from all those faces in that audience. And so from that point, it started her on a new journey, a new sojourn, as I said, where she wanted to know everything about vulnerability and emotions.
Can I tell the story about how it all started? How I understood that I had to take my armor off?
Yeah. I'd love to hear about your sojourn, about your journey to where you are today. That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. It's just when you talked about vulnerability, that's the headline of that day. because it was a beautiful autumn day. It was 19th of September. And, it was so beautiful out. And I was feeling I had one of the worst days in my life. I had just quit my job as a columnist and financial journalist in Aftenposten. And, being in a position, you have a kind of people listening to me. I had a voice in Norway. And when I stepped down from that position, my phone went silent. And I wasn't emotionally prepared for that, what would happen. That detox, I call it now, the detox of being in demand. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know about feelings at the time either. So I was just totally overwhelmed with everything. And I was having a job as a freelance journalist at a book fair down at the Opera House in Oslo. It's a white opera house in Oslo. And I remember I was sitting, I was totally black inside. The feeling of being, it was so dark. And I remember sitting backstage listening to 450 people waiting for me to come on stage and talk about the theme for the day. And the theme for the day was the power of life. And I felt so powerless. And I had like the taste of metal in my mouth. And I was so afraid. And I went on stage. I was interviewing 3 authors about life, about vulnerability, about courage. And I thought, I have to show this. I can't just talk about vulnerability like we do now. Vulnerability. We need to show vulnerability. I have to show it. So I just decided to face the audience. It was like 500 people and say, I have to show vulnerability now because I have one of the worst days in my life. My sister, it's her birthday today, and I'm so envious of her. I envy her so much. She has everything. She has a husband that she loves. She has, they met in 6th grade at school. They have 2 children, 2 wonderful children. They have a house with a garden. They grow their own tomatoes. And she has a job. She really, her dream job. And I am single and without children, and I have no job. And at that point, the room was totally quiet. And all of a sudden, I just heard 500 people yelling, "Bravo!" and like rising up, clapping their hands and cheering. And I was like, what is this? It was, I think it was my first truly connection with an audience. Like I could feel the warmth of it was like the temperature of the room was turned up. And in that moment, I thought when my envy, the smallest, most shameful feeling I know, when it can get a standing ovation at the Opera House, there's something here that I have to dig into. So in that moment, my journey, I wanted to know everything about feelings. I wanted to know what connects people, because it's obviously not perfectionism and facades. And then I discovered, of course, Brené Brown, and I'm sure...
Yeah, Brené Brown, she's pretty much the guru of vulnerability.
Yes, she's the guru of vulnerability. So this was like my first really authentic, vulnerable moment and then I discovered her, and the power of vulnerability, like you were talking about the power of vulnerability. This was now my inner gnome tells me that this story is too long and it's too boring and blah, blah, blah. And that was my.
Yeah, but I think it's because that sounded like it was a sort of that cascading moment that kind of, it opened the door to a whole world that was out there to explore. And just opening that door, exposing or speaking to your vulnerability, I think obviously that led you down a new trail. And that new trail was to explore the whole world of emotional salience and emotional valence, and to speak to, it got you to write a book. And I see that you do conferences around this. So it's created a whole different focus, business wise and passion wise, and it's given you a certain sense of purpose, it sounds like. Is this what that door opened for you when you were on that stage? I think it was September 19th, you said, at the Opera House.
It was 2009.
Yeah.
So it's 14 years ago, soon 14 years ago. Yeah. And exactly, it opened. I felt I was cracked open in that moment. And what cracked me was the love of the audience.
But that love wasn't there until you opened it, right? Because you had to be vulnerable. Then that triggered the cascading, right?
Yes.
But if I may ask, for a lot of people might be thinking, I wish I had the courage to do something like that. But, sometimes courage is about being afraid, but stepping through that fear, stepping into the storm. Can I ask you, what triggered you to open up to 500 people on stage, to crack that, to speak to that emotion you were feeling at the time? I mean, what was the tipping point? Can you recall, or is that very hard to articulate?
No. And now, I get in contact with the really raw, lonely pain inside that armor of perfectionism. Thank you for reminding me of that, because I think I was so lonely inside my byline picture in the newspaper. I was so lonely inside that armor I talked about. So I think it was the longing that finally just flooded, like the tears I hadn't cried. I think it was flooded by the tears I hadn't cried, because these authors that had written books very bravely, all of them, had written books about life, about courage, about vulnerability. I think I honored them. I had this deep gratefulness for them in that moment, and I thought, I have to pay back. So it was, and it was a particular voice inside my head, I remember now. And it was the voice of a fictional character. It was the voice of little Kathrine Løvehjerte. It's a really dear, here in Norway, it's a Swedish children's book.
Yes.
Called The Brothers Lionheart. Brødrene Løvehjerte. Brothers Lion's Heart. And that little, he's called Covering Løvehjerte, Lion's Heart. Covering Lion's Heart. He said he was very afraid. He was small and he was sick all the time. But he did one very courageous thing. And he said to himself, sometimes you have to do scary things. If not, you're not a human, just a little lort, a little shit.
Yeah.
Then it's hard, it's harsh. It's a harsh inner critic, but it ignited sometimes you have to do really hard things. So his voice was there.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, I've been running Mind Talk for the last 2 decades, and I just aged myself. But before that, I worked with, in a clinical setting, helping people to deal with difficult issues, whether anxiety or depression, or they went through some sort of trauma and such. And even now in the corporate setting, when I'm working with leaders and managers or whatever it is, I think most of us fear some sort of emotion, to go through that emotion. But I've always understood, Kathrine, what emotions are this chemical recipes of hormones and neuromodulators and neurotransmitters. And the body communicates to the brain. It doesn't have grammar, it doesn't have syntax, but what it does have is these chemical recipes that communicate something to us. And if we are more attentive to it, if we broaden our emotional vocabulary, so it's not just like guys, sad, angry, happy, but maybe overwhelm or excitement or joy or whatever it is, right? If we can get that, if we can move into the storm, what's actually on the other storm is a level of freedom. Because once we address the emotions, as I understand it, the emotions die down because they feel they're being addressed. The communication is being received, understood, and is being acted upon. But if not, you can push away the storm. You can push away the storm, the emotional storm, but it will come back with a vengeance. It'll become even stronger. And if we keep pushing it back, eventually it can drown us in depression or anxiety and such. And part of this emotion, what I hear is that on that stage, on that September 19th of 2009, something triggered in you and you opened up. But when you opened up, it showed you, it was an indicator that 500 people gave you a standing ovation, because they too, to some extent, have probably felt the same thing. But they're thinking, my God, she's actually doing it on stage. I wish I could do that. So that was a really good thing. And that's led you to write this Emotional Revolution book, to start a whole business around it, which is, I think, a necessary thing, especially now as we come out of this bloody pandemic, and we are so many months post-pandemic now.
Yeah. What you're tapping into now is, of course, the science of emotions, and that's so interesting. And what you were talking about resonates so much with me, Jason, because it's the mathematics of emotions. And this is from the data of Brené Brown again.
Please.
Dr. Brené Brown. So she says that if we run from our emotions, they own us. If we accept our emotions, we own them. So my uncried tears, they were haunting me. And all of a sudden it cracked open and it felt good. And the more I can do that now, the more love and connection I experience in my life. So that's why I think one of my purposes is to cry officially in the streets when I think tears and the signs of tears too. It's so good for us. It's like, and you talk about chemicals, when we have tears, like now after crying with you a little, I feel so good because the tears, and I was thinking about also you who listens to this. I'm so curious about how this lands out there with you, because the signs of tears shows that it creates all kinds of yummy chemicals like oxytocin and
dopamine, and serotonin,
and serotonin, and we're actually a way of getting in touch with yourself and people around you. And that is the deep longing. This is also science for us, is connection and a sense of meaning.
Well, I think the expression of emotions through tears, that's one way to process emotions, and because it's it's obviously a recognition of what you're feeling. And for some people, tears is a way of processing emotions, because if we don't process emotions, from my experience, is that they get stuck in the central nervous system. It can be anxiety that builds up. It can be the stiff shoulders, and we don't realize it. It can all constantly be this release of cortisol and adrenaline, and our what's called allostatic load gets set at such a high point. We think this state of stress is normal. But the thing is, that builds and that will affect us in so many different physiological ways. And over time, it can show up as different types of illnesses or diseases. Yeah. And I think what you're saying is, how tears are readily available to you is a one way for you to process emotions. Exactly. And I think that is a very important thing, because not everyone has that availability all the time to easily access sort of the tear ducts. If I may ask, from your experience working with people, how else can people process their emotions, to address their emotions? Are there other things that you do to help sort of listen to your emotions?
Now I'm taking a deep breath, and that's one way. Mm-hmm. Because I thought that's such a difficult and really groundbreaking question. How can we process? And I would invite everyone that listens right now to just give yourself a deep, good breath and just release everything you don't need on the out breath. And we are so generous here, so give yourself another one and fill you up with joy, and just let go of everything you hate. So this is just being, now I laughed a little because some emotions were released through the breathing. So I'm not a breathing expert, but in my programs, I use experts on breathing because it's so powerful for finding our voice and daring to speak, dare to speak from our hearts instead of our cortisol-infused brains. Yeah. And really get in contact with what's really important to us. So that's one way. And
just to address that, I think the breathing is a very important aspect that you're addressing, because sometimes when we feel overwhelmed by emotions, again, then we are thinking with our emotions instead of thinking about our emotions. And so if we can be cognizant to take a deep breath, 4 in and 8 out, or 6 in and 12 out, what it does do, as you said, it calms down our autonomic nervous system, that fight flight. We reset homeostasis in our autonomic nervous system, which brings automatically mental clarity to us. So the breath is very important because it's direct access to our autonomic nervous system. And so in these conferences,
can I give you another one?
Sure, please.
From the emotional gym, because you were kindly talking about my business, and that is just to tell what it is. It is Norway's first emotional gym, and there I train leaders and just
people in general.
People in general, to make our emotions our strength, to be strong through emotions instead of being overwhelmed by them, to regulate, to like thrive in our emotions, and to really read the information we get from it, because it's our emotional system. It's an intelligent communication system. So we receive so much valuable information. So that's what I do.
So in the emotional gym, what is one of the major exercises that you teach, if you could share with our audience?
I'd love to. I've been doing this for 4 years now, and I have 16,000 customers. And what has grown out of the data and the practice we have been doing together is that this one practice, and it's so down to basics, it's actually be kind to yourself.
Be compassionate to yourself. Show kindness.
Compassionate, yes. Also, and it's so hard because we have a brain that constantly wants to keep us afraid and safe in that way, so we don't get hit by cars or eaten by lions or what have you not. So, and my insecure academic part wouldn't dare to talk about be compassionate to yourself if it hadn't come from Yale and Harvard. And the science on this is so amazingly, yummingly clear that when you talk to yourself like someone you love, like someone you really care about, that is a total shift in connection and joy and grit and the ability of resilience. As when you talk to yourself like someone you like and care about, like you would talk to your child or your pet, or so be kind. And it's easy to say this is self-compassion. And the queen of self-compassion is Kathrine Neff, and she's from the University of Texas. Okay. Kathrine Neff, and also Chris Germer from Harvard Medical School. Self-compassion practice when something happens that's in a meeting, for example, if you sit in a meeting, and you would like to, you have something on your heart, and you would like to say it, but you're afraid. Let's say that's the situation, and that's a lot of us have that on a daily basis. So self-compassion there will help you to raise your voice, and the self-compassion speak is something like this. And find your own words, but I encourage you to find your own tone and your own words. And so the self-compassionate would be, for me, my name is Kathrine. So I would probably say something like, if I was afraid, okay, this I can feel my heartbeat. No wonder I'm afraid now, because I'm going to speak my truth. And speaking my truth is courageous. And being courageous is vulnerable. And no wonder I feel afraid. So we don't judge that feeling. No wonder. And that's the best sentence, best 2 words ever. No wonder I'm afraid. And the next step is to normalize it, even broader, and put it into our common humanity. Like all over the world right now, there's people wanting to speak their truth and being afraid. It's normal. We're so many. It's not just me.
Yeah. So if I'm feeling anxiety about this particular situation, sometimes I can think, oh, look at everyone else is calm. Yes. But it's to normalize it, saying, you know what? Everyone else is probably showing it and they're feeling it. I'm just not picking up those signals.
Right. So 1, no wonder my heart beats. 2, the people around this table probably feel the same. But some of them are so extrovert, or they talk all the time because they want to, like I used to do when I was armoring up. So probably this is a normal feeling. And the third stage after that, before you say what you really, really want, talk gently to yourself. May I be courageous in this moment? May I be good to myself. May I honor the effort that I'm doing sitting here. May I be so courageous that I support myself to say my truth, to speak my truth. And it doesn't have to be that you speak your truth right there and then. It can be, okay, it's not the time yet. That might be a totally good outcome. But it's just the inner support. And the goal is to beat the inner critic. And instead of being our worst enemy and our worst critic, be a good inner support and trainer and friend.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think that self-compassion is so important because, we turn that compassion on if it's our children, if it's our significant other, a colleague or a friend. We will, because the reason is we can be compassionate because we can see their challenges from an objective view. They're lost in the subjective storm. We can say compassionate things, but when it's ourselves, we have this blending of both subjective and objective realities going on. And sometimes we get lost in this subjective emotional storm. And what we do is kick ourselves. We're down in a fetal position and we give ourselves another boot in the head. Is that critic?
It's right? So unfair.
And we're so harsh. And so part of it is connecting with ourselves. It's understanding the emotions and it's showing compassion. And sometimes what I have found through my own experience, if we speak to ourselves in the third person, such as, Jason, everything's going to be all right. You're going to make it through this. Learn. This situation is adversity, but you will learn from this. This too shall pass. And it's showing that compassion by speaking in the third person. I can create that objective distance, which helps to trigger more of that self-compassion that you address and to tame down the bloody inner critic that tends to never shut up. In the concluding part of our conversation, Kathrine talks about how she has developed with her business partners the emotional gym. And we speak about three of the major core exercises, if we can call them, the fundamental exercise to build that emotional strength in order to build resilience to meet adversity face on. And that is returning to the breath, understanding how the breath can settle us so we can find clarity. It's about talking about compassion for others, and even more importantly, self-compassion, which many of us are not very good at. And the third major workout is the sense of gratefulness, to be appreciative, to take account of what we have, where we are, and what we're about. And so I will let Kathrine take us into the emotional gym. Get your gear on and get your sweat on. Here we go.
I'm so eager now. I'm turned on. I think
okay, fire away.
I'm turned on. So another thing that gets in the way of living a wholehearted life, living a luminous, just not without suffering and pain. I mean, we have pain all the time. Emotional pain and physical pain, and we can know that other people have the same thing. So normalize that state of being human. But living wholeheartedly, the one practice, it's self-compassion, of course, and it is, and I'm a little reluctant to say it because it's so basic. It's so banal in a way, but in Norwegian, I say that it's the core of emotional workout. We're doing like emotional workout here together with you and with me and with the listener.
Yeah, I'm ready to get my sweat on. I've got my gym attire on. Let's go. Let's show me this emotional gym.
So the emotional gym, the only rule there is that the banal is the central, also the very what the brain wants to call pathetic or banal, that's actually at the core of being human. The third practice, it's the breath and it's the self-compassion, and it's cultivating gratefulness. It's practicing
being appreciative of what you have and such.
Appreciative voice, and it all plays together. So when these cascades of worry come in, I don't know if you can feel me, but I worry a lot. I run my business. I worry about my business. I worry about my dogs. I worry about my beloved parents. They're 84 and 83. It makes my tears come just talking about these things. And I wonder, you listen, how does this land with you? Can you feel worry as well? And then gently changing the worry over to, oh, thank you. Thank you for having my dogs. Thank you for having parents. And then again, tears come. And it's a healing. It's healing. It's actually healing in the moment. And it doesn't have to be like this. Now I'm so turned on that my whole system is activated. So I cry very easily. I laugh very easily. With you, that's what happened with you, because I feel safe. And that's I feel emotional safety here. It doesn't have to be this profound, but it can be thank you for fresh water. Thank you for the coffee I'm having after. Very often I go to coffee. I'm so thankful.
Coffee's a good thing.
Yeah, it's such a good thing.
So the emotional gym, there's three things that I understand. Three major workouts is the breath. The breath can return us to a sense of stability in the here and now. And it can settle our autonomic nervous system to find mental clarity. The other one is self-compassion. And self-compassion is just that, is to be kind to ourselves, not to be so harsh, to ask ourselves that, not to say you lost or you failed, but how do you learn? How do you adapt? How do you grow from this, Jason or Katrina? And then the third one is gratefulness. And the gratefulness is to be appreciative of what we have in the here and now, our health, in your case, the dogs, your parents, what have you. And I think the gratefulness is so important, because if we think about, Katrina, any memories that we have through our long lives, the memories that we have is because something is being emotionally salient. And salient means it has meaning. We've noticed it, whether it's good or bad, whatever it is along the spectrum of emotions, emotional salience. But gratitude, or being grateful for things, what that does, that makes we're being conscious to add emotional significance to a memory, or to something that's happening to us now. And that becomes part of our collection that helps us to be more optimistic, to build us instead of tearing ourselves down. And I see that where the breathing, the self-compassion, and the gratefulness are all kind of connected in your emotional gym. Have I kind of got the picture here?
Exactly. That's that's the three ground. This is like workout that's the
fundamentals.
That's the fundamentals. Thank you. Thanks for helping me. And our goal, our purpose for doing these fundamentals that you so beautifully just summarized. The goal is to feel a sense of belonging in our own lives and belonging to each other. And it's to build resilience, and it's to build the capacity of rising fast after falls. So the purpose of it all is joy. The purpose of it all is courage. And it's the courage to say what's on your mind, the ability to have small adventures every day, talking to people in the store, talking to the little girl next door with her puppy, being human and fully alive in our lives, building joy in difficult times.
Yeah, and joy, I think that's a very good point, which you just said, Katrina, because joy is in a sense of, well, it is well-being, and well-being in itself is to understand that there are going to be inevitable setbacks, and we need to bounce back from those inevitable setbacks. And the question is how do we face adversity and challenge? A lot of us will back down or will berate ourselves or be harsh to ourselves. But if we can constantly come back to say, okay, how does this create patience in me? How can I learn from this? How can I adapt from this? And this is what growth is all about. This is that flexibility, this emotional pliability or emotional flexibility, that we can have self-compassion, that we can learn, that we can be vulnerable. But vulnerable doesn't mean weakness. It actually means a level of strength to actually go there. And I think it comes back to what you're saying. What goes against innovative thinking? Well, is that sense of expertise. And that sense of expertise, I mean, that's a whole Pandora's box, a whole package. But I think we've come kind of full circle to what you're addressing. Yeah. Emotional flexibility leads to sort of this emotional revolution, as I understand it.
Yes. And that's what exactly. I think it's so beautifully said. It's so beautifully said. Thank you, Jason. And I get so hopeful because I can feel the momentum of the revolution, of the emotion revolution, is taking hold. The momentum, we have a momentum here because there's so many people out there longing to just rip off the armor and, join us in a wholehearted exploration of what it means to be human and how we interact and how we can create better lives.
Could you maybe explain a little around your business?
My dream is to build a human academy. So that's the long-term goal. I want to make the world more human-friendly and emotion-friendly. And I have online courses and I have programs that in the end you can certificate. It's a certification process. Sure, so it's 3 levels and it's a 2-year education to be an emotional styrketrener, emotional core trainer.
Yeah.
And when organizations come to me, they come to me because they have conflicts. They have like a low level of emotional safety.
Yes.
And they have low level of, there's no fun there and there's no joy there. And
it's very transactional, maybe.
It's very transactional, hustling. People are dissatisfied and they don't get what they really would like. They don't create what they see. They don't get out the potential.
Yes.
And to getting out the potential of people, we have to go through those doors of, okay, what gets in the way? Oh, it's my shame. It's my fear of being ridiculed. It's my, where does that sit? Oh my goodness, it's in the belly. and just, so what I provide is the science and the workout, because the workout is physical. The workout this is not a quick fix. Emotional strength is daily, small steps every day, practicing using the breath, practicing the really deep listening, for instance, really listen to other people without words on my mouth, on my tongue. When I listen with words on my tongue, I'm a very bad listener.
Well, you're not truly listening. You're just waiting for your turn to speak your voice, right? There's a technique I've probably spoken on earlier podcasts, but there's something from my clinical settings, which is very important, what you're saying. And it's called echoing. And echoing is just that. So if Katrina is telling me something, like you just said, it's about listening. It's about, what I'm actually doing is I'm echoing those words in my head. So I'm actually repeating what Katrina's saying. So what happens is that my brain hears the words twice. And since the brain can only tend to focus on one thing at a time, it means I'm not thinking about my rebuttal. I'm not thinking about my next answer or my next statement. I'm actually occupying my brain by saying what you're saying, and that creates a deeper level of listening. In a clinical setting, that's perfect, but I think those skills can be applied across the board, whether you're a parent with your kids or a leader with your team.
Listening is a superpower, and it's hard because we're so trained in competition. So we are competing. We're competing to get the word. We're competing to say things. We're used to that. And that is a killer. Those kinds of cultures where we like debate all the time, and that creates psychological unsafety.
Agreed.
And we know from the Aristotle project from Google and Harvard that when people do not feel safe to speak or to get it wrong or to
make mistakes or fail.
Contradict, yes. The results of innovation and sales and what have you is 40%.
Performance drops.
Yeah, the performance drops 40% when people are not listened to, for instance, or that some people talk all the time and some people have information and other people don't. And it creates... And no wonder these are the cultures we come from, because it was the way it was done back in the times. We cannot afford that anymore, because we get depressed and we get stressed and we get lonely and we get frightened. And in the end, business lose so much money. I mean, you will go bankrupt with a bad atmosphere.
Yeah, because I think when corporations come to you, they want to know how to create more psychological safety. They want to create that sense of where they can open up, where they can have constructive conflict, where we can ask questions, we can make mistakes, we can feel included, we can learn, we can contribute. And I think all of that's so important. And I think what's very important is that, there are still remnants where when we talk about emotions, it can be very wishy-washy. And I can understand that depending on on how we approach that. But what I like about your take is that you base it, the foundation's based on science. So there's the nuts and bolts to explain the emotions. Because there are some takes where it can get too wishy-washy, it can get too woo-woo science. But if we base it in neuroscience or the cognitive sciences or whatever science that is solid, then it gives legitimacy, and it gives that legitimacy to people who tend to be more technically based, more logically based, if they think that way, analytical. And that's what I understand, because when I'm teaching brain science, whether to whatever level, I think that gives it that credibility. And I think that is a very important aspect that you've built into your business. So it can be legitimate in the eyes of different organizations and corporations.
Yeah. When you talk now again, all these, I was trying to echo.
There you go. Good stuff.
And then I was like, yes.
Well, Katrina, I really appreciate your time today. You've shared a lot of your expertise, your time, and an emotional spectrum, which I really appreciate, because you've actually showed vulnerability, and you haven't just spoke to it. You actually showed us, you shared with us your vulnerability, and I appreciate that. I found it to be a very stimulating conversation. And, you've added a lot to my understanding of emotions. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you for that.
And thank you for doing your work and letting me share what I'm boiling over with here. Thank you.
It was a blast. Thank you, Katrina.
It was. Thank you.
Well, another big thank you to Katrina Ospos for sharing her vulnerability with us, her knowledge, her wisdom, and her experience. When we go to gyms and when we go for a run, for a swim, for a bike ride, to lift weights, All of these things are to increase our physical flexibility, our strength, and our endurance. Well, we all need an emotional workout, and Katrina has built an emotional gym. And if you're curious to strengthen your emotions, to understand your emotions, to use them and to optimize them to the best of your ability, then I'd highly encourage you to pick up one of her books and to contact Katrina directly. I will leave all of her contact information and links to each of her books, which are The Age of Generosity, Pink is the New Punk, and The Emotion Revolution, in the podcast notes. Anyways, thanks again, Katrina. It was a blast. It was really a blast. And again, thank you for sharing your vulnerability. And to you, dear listener, thanks again for showing up for another week and allowing me to spend some time with you. As usual, please please share, please reshare, recommend, and rate the podcast because it means a lot. I am also very open and curious to get feedback from you as to what you'd like to hear more of, what you would like me to address, what I could improve. So I'm curious to get any comments and feedback from you if you are willing to take the time to share with me. Well, until next time, until next week, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.